Okay, in this video we are going to talk about something very important. That is wrong answer choices. Yes, that may seem counterintuitive that we'd be focusing on the wrong answers because after all, it's all about the right answer, right? Well, kind of. The thing is you can't always find the right answer right at the go. So you need to come up with a backup strategy and you have to really understand how the test writers create these tests. They lay traps, if you will. And those traps are these alluring answers. They seem right, but they're not right. And why aren't they right? Well, if you know why answers are incorrect, that is, if you know what to look out for, you'll be better prepared not to fall for the traps. And so that's what we're going to go over in this video. Now, first off, you will notice here that we are dealing with a passage. And again, read actively, read critically. This holds true for any passage. So I'm assuming that you have paused the video and you've read the entire passage. Okay. Of course, now that you've read actively and critically and you've created a structure in your mind, that is, you can look away from the computer screen and say, oh, this passage is about telescopes, how they rely on incoming light or electromagnetic radiation from outer space. And whether it's a Galileo's first telescope or the most complex telescope, it's all about analyzing light as it comes in. Okay, so we've broken that passage down, and we now have a question. And this question is called an inference question. It can be inferred from the passage that spectroscopy. Well, an inference question is an important question. It is a subtle question. It's one of the more difficult questions. And an inference question is asking you to look at the passage, and on the information based solely on the passage, what can you definitely say is true? And so one of these, while it is not explicitly, that is word for word, stated in the passage, based on the information in the passage, you can say, this is definitely 100% correct. Now, when we go through here, what we're going to be looking out for are these wrong answers. Wrong answers down here. And we have sometimes answers can be out of scope. That means that not even mentioned in the passage to begin with. So we'll call that OS, out of scope. Number 2, we have extreme or assumes too much. So we'll call that EX, or we'll just call it AS. I don't want to put 2 S's there. For the third one, we have rotten fruit. And I'm going to go through all of these, but for rotten fruit, we're going to have RF. And rotten fruit means that everything that you see at first, at least, in an answer choice seems right. But there's a certain part, that little spot, those 1 or 2 words that are incorrect, that invalidate the entire answer. And the idea here is you want to make sure that you look at the entire answer, not just the nice part of the fruit, but the rotten part. So if a little bit is wrong, it's a rotten fruit error. Then for number 4, the too broad, too narrow, this deals with main idea questions usually. So what's the primary purpose or main idea of the passage? Some answer choices will be too broad, too general, some too narrow, too specific. So too broad or narrow. And 5, this is a subtle one, but very important. True, but doesn't answer the question. And what that means is a statement could be true in the real world, a fact. We all agree with it. So it could be true in the real world. However, it is not found in the passage. We cannot say, oh, therefore that's the answer. And likewise, sometimes you have something that's true and it is in the passage. However, it doesn't answer the question. It's basically an answer choice that, it talks about line 5, but we're dealing with line 25. So that's definitely something to look out for as well now as we go through this question. So let's read it one more time, and hopefully this time I can pronounce that last word correctly. It can be inferred from the passage that spectroscopy. Okay, so which one is it? So let's look at it. Or should I look at A? Aha! I've made a cardinal error by looking directly at A. And what that cardinal error is I have decided to look at the answer choices before doing what? Well, before going back to the passage. So the key here is always go back to the passage. But before we go back to the passage, we want to have a good idea of what the question is. And sometimes that entails rephrasing the question. Here, the question is pretty straightforward. Basically, it can be inferred from S, and we're going to call this word here S to make it easy. And at that point, we can then go back to the passage. And what can we say about spectroscopy? So we go back here to the passage, and we're going to have to do a little unhighlighting there. So in this case, we look for S, and there it is. Scientists rely on S. What is it? Well, it's the process of separating light emitted by an object in space into its opponent wavelengths, as a prism does, and then analyzing those components. So that's important. It takes light from an object in space, from a distant object, and it breaks that light up, or analyzes that light. What have I done? I've now answered, or at least anticipated the answer myself. This is very important. Now, I can go back and say, okay, well, is it A? Aha. See, now I'm armed, if you will, ready to go. And so with A, it says, is one of the new tools. Wait a second. We just said it can analyze light from objects in outer space. So that doesn't make sense. Now, you may say, oh, but I saw something regarding tools. And you may be right, or you are right. And they invent new tools to analyze light. However, are these new tools referring to S, or spectroscopy? No, it's referring to they and scientists. So in addition to spectroscopy, or S, they invent new tools. So new tools isn't talking about S. So you can see this is tricky. They take something in another part of the passage, and they try to confuse you on it. So could pertain to another passage, true maybe, but doesn't actually answer the question. So out with A. B, interprets information from distant objects. Well, we said that it takes light from outer space, takes that information, analyzes that light. And of course, if an object's not in space, it is far away or distant, and so there's our answer, just like that. B. Now we can look at C. Relies only on one end of the infrared spectrum. We can go back to the passage and we can see, oh, wait a second, it doesn't actually do that. It separates light from both sides of the spectrum. So separates light and analyzes the light. So it doesn't just focus on one end of the spectrum. So in this case, that's just flat out wrong, because it's saying the opposite of what the passage actually says. D, insufficient to describe the contours of objects in space. Now this is a tempting answer choice, and one that many of you may have chosen if you gave yourself a little bit of time to solve this on your own. Why isn't D correct? Well, if it's just analyzing light, is that enough to really describe the contours of objects in space? Maybe, right? Or maybe not, but it seems like it could be. But do you see how weak that is? I have to make these extra logical leaps, and it's simply not backed up in the passage. It just assumes too much. It assumes that by analyzing light, we cannot analyze anything about the contours of an object, and that's just too much. We cannot assume that based on the information of the passage. And you can see that B is almost so literal. It's just simply reinterpreting what's said, and that's what an inference question is. It's a very safe answer, not like D. You don't have to do anything extra. Finally, there's E, does not rely solely on light emissions. Well, it sounds like it can only be based on light. Looks at light, takes light, analyzes or breaks up that light. And so if it says does not rely solely on light emissions, that's incorrect. That's adding something that's not mentioned in the passage at all. So that's out, and you can see that B is our answer. Now, these wrong answer choices down here, again, I'm going to highlight them. These are going to come into play in all the questions we're going to go through. So it's important to know them now, know that they're out there. And again, as we go through questions in the following videos, you will be applying the wrong answer nomenclature.